This is the most rewarding and exciting survival challenge in the history of solo wilderness living, with the longest duration and highest prize ever. 10 wilderness survival experts will be randomly dropped into the Arctic. If they survive for 100 days, they will win $1 million. Contestants must withstand temperatures as low as -40 degrees and be constantly on guard against attacks from black bears, wolverines, and moose. Moreover, they can only carry 10 specific tools. Many people might think this challenge is too simple, but is it really? Contestant Roland, a licensed hunting guide, usually studies prey and cuts trees besides setting traps. Participating in this wilderness challenge is not just for the $1 million. He also wants to prove himself as a master beast hunter of the forest. After the challenge began, he did not let any edible thing pass by, such as roasted socks right in front of him or ants on the tree trunk. These black ants contain small amounts of iron, zinc, magnesium, potassium, and phosphorus, but people generally wouldn't eat them unless absolutely necessary, as they are hard to chew and can upset the stomach. After breakfast, Roland went to the lakeside to look for moose tracks. Instead of finding moose, he found plenty of black bear footprints and stumbled upon a bundle of fishing line, which could have been left by a contestant from Season 6. Relieved that he didn't bring fishing gear, Roland began to look along the shore for a good fishing spot. Just then, a wolverine suddenly charged at him. It was highly aggressive, but it turned and ran away the next second. Roland, holding an axe confidently, said if it came any closer, he would deal with it with his axe. Contestant Callie, a winter expedition guide, has survived 15 days in temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius, so she felt confident in handling the Arctic conditions. Joining the Wilderness Challenge was not only to win the $1 million, but also to demonstrate the resilient spirit of women. Callie dislikes active hunting and fishing, so she sets up 7 passive traps each day. While checking her traps, she found some spruce resin and chewed it like gum. It is unclear whether it was due to abundant resources or her superior skills, but Callie's traps soon caught a large fat rabbit. The sight made her very sad, and uncontrollable tears ran down her cheeks. She quickly returned to the shelter and tearfully ate 2 large bowls. Contestant Joe, who grew up in the countryside, naturally possessed outdoor survival experience. As an adult, he became a biologist, preferring to understand nature rather than focusing on the gender-based abilities. He knows which plants are edible by simply tasting them. He stated that his purpose for competing was not for the $1 million prize, but to enjoy the process of challenging the extremes. While scouting for a suitable camping site, he spotted a squirrel on a large tree. As he was not skilled in hunting and had not brought a bow and arrow, he decided to throw stones at it. After 2 throws, unfortunately he missed the squirrel, but somehow the squirrel fell from the tree and died. Joe quickly picked it up. This contestant must be a master to survive 100 days in the Arctic and win the $1 million. Before competing, he had intensely practiced survival and building skills at home, mastering tools like adobe houses, wooden rakes, and tea jars. He is a survival video blogger who not only showcases his creations, but also studies past seasons of wilderness survival videos, so he is quite confident about this challenge. After being dropped off by helicopter, Shawn first sought his sole companion, his camera equipment. Unexpectedly, the case was covered in black bear bite marks. He quickly packed up to leave the dangerous area and, after finding a new campsite, decided to scout around. Approaching a large tree, he suddenly stopped, drew his bow, and shot an arrow upwards. A wild boar fell from the tree, an incredibly lucky start that thrilled Shawn.
One porcupine barbecue coming up.
With his shelter built, he processed the boar and set up a grill. Roasting the meat not only crisped the outside and kept the inside tender, but also prevented fat loss. With everything ready, Shawn attempted to start a fire. Everything in the Arctic was damp, and even with a flint, starting a fire took a long time.
Should pull it apart nice and easy in the morning. Be a good breakfast.
After a night of smoking, he'd have a fragrant breakfast. For now, he'd stew a pot of pork leg. After eating, Shawn took the pot to the lake to avoid attracting carnivores at night. But he was awakened by the sound of the pot being knocked over, possibly by a black bear or a wolverine. Bravely, he headed to the shore and found the lid off the pot. The thief could be nearby in the bushes. Frightened, Shawn returned to his shelter, unable to sleep, worried he might become prey. Meanwhile, on day 4 of his challenge, Joe experienced an Arctic bath before the snow.
Oh, it's not warm.
To survive 100 days and win $1 million, he needed to stock up on food before winter. As a botanist, Joe gathered some coral mushrooms, thinking some meat would make a perfect soup. While searching for food, Joe stopped abruptly, likely seeing something. It was a bear approaching him. Joe had 2 choices: avoid it or confront it. With no weapons, he walked towards the bear, perhaps trying to warm the bear or improve its diet. However, the bear disappeared before he reached it. Joe joked that he must have scared it back home. Callie, after several days of scouting, finally chose a campsite. She initially wanted to build a large house using a classic 7-post structure, but opted for a small, practical, warm cabin due to the extreme temperatures of up to -40 degrees Celsius. She started with a wooden frame and filled the gaps with moss, then piled thick pine branches around it and built a small door. The result was a cozy and well-insulated cabin, excellently constructed. Now, all she needed to do was focus on gathering food. In contrast, Joe was still in a simple tent, having only caught a squirrel at the start and otherwise relying on vegetarian meals. He looked forward to his traps yielding something daily. Surprisingly, a rabbit was caught today. As per tradition, he had to cry before he could start eating. But just as he got emotional, he noticed another rabbit nearby, indicating a possible rabbit infestation in the area. On the other side, Shawn had been targeted by a bear after eating porcupine. Since then, he has been sleeping with a bear deterrent whistle. He managed to hold out until the 10th day before he felt safe enough to build a shelter. The structure was well suited for cold weather protection and warmth. His crafting of Thor's hammer was quite professional. It was a shame not to have him as a carpenter. During his break, Shawn planned to find some food but ended up collecting more gear than food, including a shovel and an abandoned shotgun. He even found an abandoned boat, which seemed quite absurd to him. Logically, these items should be very useful, but Shawn had other ideas. He first propped up the boat with 2 stones, then filled it with water, and finally lit a fire under it. Next, he performed a unique trick by stewing himself in a makeshift bath.
Northwest Territory, who? Arctic Circle, what? Feels amazing! Woo!
After the bath, Shawn prepared to make a fire for cooking but couldn't find his flint in his pocket. He searched his tent, clothes, and previous locations for hours, but to no avail. The flint was essential for cooking, heating, and warding off wild animals, and surviving the Arctic winter without fire would be very difficult. Ultimately, overwhelmed by despair, Shawn chose to quit the competition. It was a regrettable decision given his strong start, but he likely wouldn't regret it after watching the show. Even though he lost, he was definitely the most popular contestant this season. The contestants this season are indeed strong. Currently, there is a contestant named Mark, a former Marine who served for 10 years and is an experienced scout. After retiring, he supported his family by teaching survival skills. He decided to enter the wilderness alone to win the $1 million. Possibly learning from past episodes, he immediately made a spiked net for fishing. In just 6 days, he caught 7 fish. His decision was wise as he could continuously secure food before the lake froze and use his spare time to build a luxurious shelter. To preserve the fish, he decided to build a fireplace, which could smoke the fish while preventing the shelter from catching fire. He also planned several stone slabs as a cooking platform. If he had enough supplies, surviving 100 days was possible. Still, catching a large animal was high on Mark's list. The camera then moved to Roland, who was already storing food for later. He collected berries and stored them in his shoes to shake them for even flavoring before putting them into a natural storage cabinet. This way, even if he couldn't hunt large game, he could at least rely on these pickled berries for sustenance. Besides food, a safe and warm shelter was necessary. After several days of scouting, Roland decided to build a stone house. This was a dangerous and physically demanding task, with some stones weighing over 180 pounds. You could imagine how strong Roland was. Although there was a risk of injury, the stone walls could absorb and retain heat, making it much more comfortable when winter arrived. After completing the walls, Roland began constructing a stone chimney, completing the fireproofing of the shelter. He then moved to the second phase of building a wooden roof. Building a stone house was already an unprecedented feat, but chopping wood only added to his legendary status. Roland's approach was not just about surviving, but living indefinitely. After securing the overall framework with an egg-shaped structure, filling in the rest with logs was straightforward. The next contestant, Corey, is also very impressive. He was born into a family of hunters and gatherers and learned to use a primitive longbow from a young age. After growing up, he served in the Marine Corps for 4 years, developing a resilient spirit and mastering many survival skills. Currently, Corey is single and is competing to win the prize money and get married. Right now, he is demonstrating his skills on a squirrel, and his posture suggests the animal is in trouble. All contestants this season have unique skills, making the upcoming challenges akin to a mythical battle. Corey has put great effort into building a wooden cabin, with a solid wood bed and a small kitchen, following a neat A-frame structure. The gaps between the sticks are filled with moss for insulation. Although the construction process was complex, it will be warm during the Arctic winter. After completing the frame, he started building a log roof, but stumbled and fell into a pit. Despite the pain from a loud thump, Corey got up, believing his strong will would help him persevere. He cannot give up on the $1 million for a minor injury. 13 years ago, he had knee surgery, and his current pain might be a recurrence of that old injury. He hopes to recover gradually in the upcoming challenges. The next challenger is Amos, a Native American with inherent advantages. Years of warfare have equipped him with wilderness survival skills, including camping, gathering, and hunting. He is competing to improve his family's life. Among the 10 tools he brought is a net, with which he spotted a white flash from afar and caught a big fish, providing energy for several days. While others thank nature tearfully, he repeats a spiritual ritual after processing the fish.
There we go. It's good fat. Put that in the pot.
Just as Amos finished, a badger burst out of the bushes, giving him a look as if to say, "Call me when it's cooked." Known as notorious campsite predators, badgers now require constant vigilance against their raids. The second female contestant this season is Callie, an avid budget traveler. She never stays in houses, preferring tents and caves. In winter, she tracks cougars. In summer, she makes fish traps. And in autumn, she turns hiking shoes into leather to get out of budget traveling. She is eager to win the challenge. After the challenge started, Callie set traps continuously. But while others enjoyed big meals, she caught nothing. Others have already built impressive shelters, but she hasn't even found a suitable camping spot yet. While searching for food, she saw a white flash and realized it was a pack of gray wolves. Instead of leaving, she followed them but soon lost track. Returning to camp, she decided to immediately build a shelter, as the wolves would eventually find her. Callie first constructed a simple A-frame using small trees and shaved the bark to prevent the tarp from tearing. However, when she covered it with the tarp, she was stunned by the wind. Meanwhile, another contestant, Mark, was living comfortably in a large villa, enjoying smoked fish. He had caught several big fish with his net a few days earlier. To prevent carnivores from stealing the meat, Mark decided to install a security door on his shelter. Food is crucial for winning the $1 million. The structure was simple. He laid some sticks as the base, filled the middle with a thick layer of spruce branches, and tied more sticks on top. Thus, he created a secure and warm door and went back inside to continue enjoying his fish soup and smoked fish. The sudden call of a crow made him alert. He quickly ran outside to check and found a black bear nearby. Likely attracted by the smell of smoked fish, Mark decided to confront the bear, but unfortunately lost sight of it after following it for a while. He had hoped to lure the bear by imitating a wounded rabbit, but instead of attracting the bear, he scared away the crows. Callie had a tough time during this period. She couldn't secure food and had to endure the wind. She had to move and rebuild her shelter, settling for a depression in the land as the best available spot. Before starting work, she decided to find some food to boost her energy and was lucky to discover a porcupine in a rock crevice. Callie shot it with an arrow, and her expression clearly showed she had hit her target. As a first-time meat eater, Callie finally enjoyed a big meal. She quickly went to the lake to clean the porcupine, which gave her enough strength to build a house. By the 10th day, Corey had been searching for prey near the camp, but hadn't used his archery skills. He decided to weave a fish net. After setting it up, he hadn't gone far before his knee began to hurt severely, so he ate some berries to stave off hunger. Returning to the lake, hoping for a catch, he found a fish caught in the net, making him more excited than getting married. However, he twisted his leg in the process.
My homemade gill net worked. It's only been in the water for 1 day, but man, I needed this fish.
But he rushed back to camp and cooked a pot of fish soup, his first taste of a protein-rich meal, and was grateful for the fish, never imagining his knee problems would worsen. Over the next few days, his knee clicked when he walked, and a large cyst formed behind his knee, risking infection and amputation if it didn't recede. He also developed a fever at night. Wanting to prove his survival skills but not at the cost of his health, Corey, after much consideration, made the call to quit the competition. To cope with the Arctic cold and wild animals, Joe prepared to build a safe and warm wooden house. He thought Roland's stone house was luxurious until he saw this season's contestants outdoing each other. Although his progress was slower, as long as he could build it and secure food, winning the $1 million was still possible. The 9th contestant, Joel, lived a secluded life in South Africa from a young age and learned many survival skills in the Maasai tribe. Perhaps because his survival school wasn't profitable, he decided to try his luck in this wilderness survival challenge. Besides rabbits and squirrels, he hadn't caught any other significant prey. Today, like other days, was a day for hunting in the wild. He was lucky to find moose tracks and droppings. After careful examination, Joel determined they were from a musk deer, known for its natural musky scent. But it wasn't this animal's droppings, as it had been devoured by a pack of wolves. Joel felt mixed emotions, happy for the chance to catch a moose or musk deer, but worried he might become prey for the wolves. The camera shifts to Roland, who hasn't been eating much besides grass lately. He is annoyed with the location chosen by the production team. In a 300-acre forest, no animals are in sight. Roland resorts to collecting some roots early, storing them in crevices near his food. These marginal food sources provide minimal energy, but could be vital when winter hits. He had hoped that a fishing net would land him some big fish, but while other contestants are tired of eating fish, Roland hasn't caught anything. He decides to move the net to deeper waters. After setting up the net, he checks his traps and luckily catches a squirrel, giving him enough energy to finish his shelter roof. His energy expenditure these past few days hasn't matched his intake, so he hurries to complete his shelter to focus on gathering food. After constructing the wooden frame, he covers it with moss and a waterproof sheet, then adds a chimney. The scene cuts to Joel, who has fitted a new body onto a cow's head, keeping it near his shelter. He can sleep facing it, possibly attracting good fortune. After this, Joel checks his fishing net, essential for his survival. The net doesn't disappoint, adding a white base to his tally of 6 fish. Just then, Joel spots a big fish in the water, hoping to stock up before the lake freezes to boost his chances of winning the $1 million prize. To protect his food from wolverines or foxes, Joel builds a high storage rack. He makes a ladder from sticks, finds 3 large trees, cuts branches for a platform, and climbs to a suitable height to trim the treetops. His posture is concerning, and he soon falls, fortunately without injury. Fixing the ladder, he switches to a handsaw, finishes the other 2 trees, and completes the platform, which he covers with pine branches to store the fish. He now has a perfect food storage room. Lastly, the camera focuses on Kelth, for whom the challenge is just a change of scenery, having lived in the forest with his family for 30 years. His skills in gathering, hunting, and fishing are routine. Kelth's shelter is unique, though it's uncertain if it will withstand snowfall. So far, he has only caught squirrels and grouse, which hardly satisfy his needs. Spotting elk droppings only makes him yearn for more. Fortunately, a squirrel appears, and Kelth shoots it with an arrow. The squirrel cooperates by rolling straight to him.
I got a whole pile of squirrel guts. We're gonna go out and set some more bank lines.
After processing it, he uses the innards for fishing, quickly hooking a fish. As he reels it in, it gets off the hook, but he manages to grab it, providing a week's energy.
I caught a trout! Thank you, Mr. Trout. I'm gonna fillet this dude out and then smoke it, make fish jerky with him.
The regained fish tastes delicious. He smokes some for preservation and cooks the rest into soup and grilled fish, As temperatures drop, Joe's craving for food intensifies. He checks his traps only to find them empty and damaged. On the way back, he spots a squirrel under a stone and uses a stick to block its only escape route. He tries to poke it out but misses. Deciding to find a better stick, the squirrel dashes away. Joe feels lost, thinking of his unfinished mansion and the berries and wild vegetables he's sick of eating. On the other hand, Amos is probably the richest contestant so far. By day 6, he had caught a large dogfish and has had a catch nearly every day since, sometimes even 2 at a time. He has caught a total of 11 fish. This survival show has turned into a fishing masterclass for him. Continuing like this, winning the $1 million seems imminent. To keep other predators from stealing his catch, Amos tied the guts together to make a net bag and hung the smoked fish in a tree. Despite this, it didn't stop other animals from being interested. One evening, after drinking fish soup, he heard noises outside that seemed to come from a wolverine, not a rabbit, and saw glowing eyes. Amos decided to confront it with a bow and arrow. He thought he would end up like Joe, who had killed a wolverine, but after searching around, he said the wolverine had been scared off. Amos could only hope it wouldn't find the fish, which he had worked hard to save. The camera then moves to Callie, who is fishing seriously by the lake. Her first cast is unsuccessful, and embarrassingly, the lure flies off on her second attempt. Despite repeated failures, she finally masters the technique. However, an hour passes with no bites. She decides to take her sleeping bag and try deeper waters. This new spot works better, and she catches a fish within an hour. Unfortunately, the fish escapes before she can secure it. Callie thinks her luck might be better in the afternoon and decides to spend the night there. Regrettably, she still catches nothing the next morning. After an hour, she breaks down. Just as she is about to return to camp, she is stunned by the sight of a moose slowly walking into the water. Realizing she didn't bring her bow and arrow, she mimics a female moose's mating call to keep it around. The moose looks back at her, giving her a chance to fetch her bow and arrow. By the time she returns, the moose has moved away. She crouches down, clutching her head in frustration, as the $1 million slips through her fingers. So far, all 10 contestants have appeared on screen. Excluding the 2 who were eliminated in the first 2 episodes, 8 remain. While others are still struggling to find food, Mark's fishing net has caught 26 big fish. He thought it would be challenging to find food before the competition, but now he can't fit any more smoked meat on the racks inside his shelter. He has no choice but to build a bigger one outside. Mark constructs a sturdy tripod from sticks with a space in the middle for the fish and a fire underneath for smoking. He then sets up an alarm system around the rack. If any animal tries to steal his food at night, Mark is ready to shoot it from his shelter. After building the rack and encircling it with pine branches, he finishes the large smoking rack. Having sorted out his food, he starts grooming his hair. Mark crafts a wooden comb and styles his hair like Tony, the barber. Having eaten too much fish recently, he suffers from diarrhea and reluctantly uses reindeer moss to improve his diet. After eating the moss, he plans to find some blueberry roots to brew tea. He doesn't find any roots, but there is plenty of fresh bear scat, likely from that morning and very close to his camp. As the bears prepare for hibernation, Mark won't let them eat easily. He decides to take the initiative and guard the bushes, hoping to catch a bear. Although many say you can't have your fish and bear it too, it's good to have dreams. What if they come true? The scene switches to Callie. The previous shelter was just catching the northwest wind, so she found a new place and built another one. The porcupine she caught a few days ago has already been eaten. She decides to go out and see if she can catch another one, and also to check the trap she set a few days ago. The first one is empty, which is a bit disappointing. But when she sees the second one, she gets excited. It turns out to be just a rabbit. Callie picks it up, and after some preparation, the rabbit turns into a delicious meal. After eating, she starts performing a talent show titled Playing with Mud in the Arctic. She plans to make some pottery with this clay. First, she rolls it into a long strip, then pinches a bowl base and places it near the fire to bake before continuing to shape it. Callie's craftsmanship is really good. By the end of the day, pots and pans are made, though it's uncertain if they can be used for cooking. On day 18 of the challenge, Joel just caught 2 fat rabbits. Unfortunately, it wasn't recorded by the camera, so he decides to reenact the scene, pretending to be a grass-eating bear. which gives the rabbits a false sense of security. He mustn't make eye contact with them, and slowly pulls the bowstring to shoot. Next, he starts performing the rabbit's role, especially the last few twitches, which seem like a waste of talent not going to Hollywood. After the performance, he quickly cooks a pot of kidneys. Normally, he wouldn't eat organs, but he not only enjoys them, but also uses chopsticks very skillfully. As the Arctic winter approaches, Joel plans to install a small door on the shelter. But while he is working hard, a fly suddenly enters his ear. This is bad, as it could force him to withdraw from the competition and lose a chance at $1 million. He tries to pick it out with his fingers, but can't reach it. Then he tries to use pliers, but that doesn't help either. The fly, scared, burrows deeper. Joel tries using a headlamp to coax it out, but the fly doesn't fall for it. In panic, he shakes his head vigorously and breathes heavily. Finally, after an hour, he comes up with a solution. He takes a syringe, injects water into his ear, shakes his head a few times, and throws his head down. The noise in his ear stops, and he finds nothing on the ground. The fly must have drowned. Meanwhile, another great participant, Kelth, is preparing to carve a bone needle with a stone and tattoo the number of days he has survived on his body. After some time, he makes a sharp needle. He mixes berry juice with charcoal to make ink and starts tattooing himself on his ankle, using an A and 7 for the 7th season of Wilderness Solitude and 25 dots for the days survived. After the performance, he gets down to business. Kelth plans to weave a fishing net to catch more food before the lake freezes over, since the 2 automatic fishing devices are too inefficient. Once the net is made, he doesn't put it in the water right away. Instead, he adds properties to it by soaking it in hot water mixed with berry juice. A colored net like this becomes invisible to fish at night. He finds a suitable spot at the lakeside, puts the net in, and secures it with wooden stakes at the end. Now, it's just a matter of time and fish. The camera moves to Roland's side. His fishing net has been in the water for several days. He has been hoping to catch some big fish each day. Today, when he checked the net, he finally got his wish. There were 2 fish hanging in the net. Judging by their size, they would feed him for many days. Roland carefully brought the net ashore to remove the fish. He said that catching 20 more would easily last him 100 days, unaware that Mark was already tired of it. Kelth also reached the time to pull in his nets. Full of hope, he went to the lake to check his catch, only to find his fishing gear and net empty. The lack of food had caused him to feel dizzy. With no choice, he gathered some rock tripe from the stones to stave off hunger. Although this lichen is edible, it's not recommended unless necessary. It's best eaten without looking, just swallowed. Shaking it slightly brings out a beef flavor.
Swallow it, shake a little bit, move on to the next bite. It's good. Oh, it's so good. So good. Tastes just like filet mignon. Oh, I can't get enough of it. It's delicious.
After finishing, he even had others try it, comforting himself that he was full of energy. Unexpectedly, the next second, he sat by the shore contemplating life. After hesitating, he made a call on a satellite phone, only to dial a fake number. This man was truly mischievous. Even eating grass, he remained optimistic. He needed to check his traps for any catch. Luckily, this time he finally caught something edible. Although the squirrel was small, it was better than eating lichen. Perhaps even the heavens couldn't bear to watch as snowflakes began to fall. Back at camp, Kelth got a barbecue going, joking that it would be great if the squirrel had 6 legs. He planned to eat the meat today and make soup the next day. However, he experienced stomach cramps that night and saw no improvement by morning. He thought some hot soup might help, but his condition worsened. He lay on the ground vomiting nonstop until his stomach was empty and the pain was severe. Drinking water and massages were of no help. He felt he was about to dehydrate. He decided not to call for help, fearing he might not make it. Kelth's challenge ended on day 22. As the Arctic temperature continued to drop, the gap between the competitors widened. Out of 10 challengers, only 7 remained. It was Joe's 23rd day in the wilderness. Initially, I thought he was a winner, but now I'm disappointed. As the Arctic winter approached and snow was imminent, he still shivered in a makeshift tent. Apart from eating a few small animals at the start, the most we saw him eat were berries and wild vegetables. He had planned to muster his energy to build a shelter today, but his small frame couldn't handle much. So far, he had lost 10% of his body weight. If he couldn't get protein soon, winning the $1 million seemed unlikely. He needed to check his traps for any catch. Fortunately, from a distance, he saw a white patch. Upon closer inspection, he was stunned. It was a large rabbit, but something had bitten off its head. Joe regretted not checking sooner, hoping the next trap would be uneventful. The next scene only brought him more despair, as the rabbit had been completely scavenged by other animals. It was hard to say if he was lazy or just unlucky. Building a shelter had already been draining, and his struggle for food was intercepted. It was uncertain when his shelter would be completed. Callie, on the other hand, was quite insightful. Considering the approaching cold Arctic winter, she decided to upgrade and reinforce her shelter. Otherwise, the snow would signal her withdrawal from the competition. Callie first thought of using stones, not only to seal one end of the shelter tightly, but also because the stones retained heat, providing warmth. After a period of tedious stacking and arranging, she managed to build a fire pit at the bottom. She then filled the gaps with some clay and created a smoke vent on top of the fireplace. Finally, she sealed the remaining gaps with wood and moss, completing a large fireplace. Honestly, it turned out very well. Although her shelter was inferior to others, the fireplace significantly elevated its status. With a continuous food supply, winning $1 million was still possible. Meanwhile, our heavyweight competitor Joe had his rabbit stolen a couple of days ago. Now he could only work for 5 minutes and then rest for 2 hours. He had to try his luck fishing by the lake, hoping to continue building his shelter, or the coming days would be grim. Fortunately, luck was on his side, and soon a fish took the bait. This fish, likely the largest so far, could secure him the $1 million. Joe nearly broke his molar pulling it up. The trout weighed at least over 10 pounds, ensuring he wouldn't worry about food for the next week. The scene shifts to Keelan, who had just washed her underwear and brushed her teeth. Her greasy long hair was bothering her, so she decided to cut it, turning out quite well. After styling her hair, she took her bow and arrow to check her traps. She hoped for a rabbit every 2 days or a larger game to last until the end. Unfortunately, she found nothing after a full round, so she decided to scout the area. Walking along, she suddenly spotted something and released an arrow straight at the target. Her archery skills were unmatched. Today, she would eat well. However, her shelter lacked a chimney, and the smoke nearly blinded her. Without a chimney, she might turn into jerky before the rabbit cooked. Keelan started by making a square hole in the roof, then sealed the edges with clay, crafting a simple chimney. Although basic, it worked effectively. Turning to Amos, he surprisingly found a can, smelling as bad as anchovy paste, which could be hazardous if eaten. He decided to rely on his fishing net instead. Currently, his food supply would last only half a month. He needed to catch as many fish as possible, as survival would become extremely difficult once the lake froze over. When pulling in his net, he found it nearly washed away and quickly retrieved it with a stick. Fortunately, it hadn't drifted far. As snow began to fall, he realized he needed to gather firewood to prepare for the unknown duration and severity of the weather. He needed to keep warm to survive. As night fell and the snow intensified, Amos discovered his axe was missing, an essential survival tool. Fortunately, the snow didn't last long. The next day, Amos found his axe back at the chopping site and couldn't help but kiss it fervently. Roland experienced a rainy night yesterday. To be safe, he pulled up his fishing net and planned to set it again today. However, the lake was still rough and dangerous, but obtaining food was urgent. With great effort, Roland managed to set the net properly. When he got to shore, a black bear just glanced at him. He thought about turning the bear into his lunch. Sensing danger, the bear quickly darted into the woods. Roland, seeing a chance to strike it rich, decided to circle the woods and set up an ambush, considering the wind direction to avoid startling it. It could be a tough battle, but securing a black bear would make the 100-day survival challenge much easier, and the $1 million prize achievable. Do you think he can defeat a black bear on his own? Feel free to leave your guesses in the comments.